Welcome to another class of PLAR History and Geography. That is right, this is PLAR History and Geography here at Wausau Distance Education. Here in Silico, it is very cold on this Thursday morning. Hopefully everyone is staying nice and warm. Again, my name is Jonathan. I am your teacher, your instructor for this course. Again, we're going to have a lot of fun together for the next 9 weeks where we will be looking at history topics, Canadian history topics, and then halfway throughout the course, we'll switch gears and look at geography topics. So I just want to go over a couple of things before we start off with today's lesson in class. Again, just to remind everyone's welcome to call in, listen in, and participate throughout my lesson. So again, you can always call 1-800-465-7144 if you want to listen and participate. Again, all my contact info is on the screen again, is also in your course syllabus, your course guideline. Again, feel free to give me a call anytime during my office hours if you have any difficulties, any questions. You can also fax me any questions or assignments or any other needs you may have. You have my cell number if you want to get in touch with me after my office hours in the evenings or on weekends. If you have a question with your assignments. Again, my email, I'm always on my email during my office hours, so feel free to fire off an email if you have a question. Again, social media, I do have Facebook, so I know everyone probably have Facebook nowadays, so feel free to add me as a friend at jhowasa. Okay, and then that way we can communicate back and forth. I can give you feedback. And then once this 9-week term is over, you can just simply delete me as a friend, or you can keep me as a friend. Again, I always post all my lessons onto my YouTube channel. Again, you can also access all my lessons through the Wausau archive. If you don't have internet access, it's not the end of the world. Give me a shout and I'll send you a USB stick with all my lessons, videos containing, and all the materials that you may need. Okay? So again, many ways to get in touch with me, get a hold of me if you're having any problems. Okay? Are there any questions? Any questions before we begin? I noticed that we got Nancy on listening and participating. Hello, Nancy. How are you today? Hopefully you can hear me. No, that's okay. That's all right. Hopefully we'll get to hear Nancy once she gets a chance to turn on her mic. So, last class, I went over my expectations, our goal for the next 9 weeks, or I went over the study guide, the course syllabus, and all that fun material. Again, just want to remind everyone what you need for this course is the textbook, which has all the reading materials. You also need your workbook that contains all the assignments and questions that you will be needing to answer. Again, if you don't have your course material, talk to your DEC and hopefully they can get that to you. If not, just give me a shout and we'll figure that out. Okay. Again, I just want to emphasize that all the content material is exactly the same as last term, term 1A, term 1B. So if you are continuing with PLAR, that's great. I know a lot of people are working on their assignments and writing their tests, which is great. I believe Nancy is from Fort Hope. If I'm incorrect, just let me know. But thank you, Fort Hope, for calling in and listening.
Is Sophie Yellowhead?
Oh, it's Sophie's again. Hello, Sophie. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
Good. Do you have any questions right now before I begin today's lesson, Sophie?
Yes, yes.
Everything's good. Do you have your textbook? Do you have your workbook?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Excellent. Again, Sophie or Nancy or whoever that may be, if you have any questions throughout my lesson, just let me know. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. If something makes no sense at all whatsoever, just let me know and I will say it again in a different way. Okay, so again, thank you, Sophie. Thank you for Hope, and thank you everyone else for listening to me here at WASA for PLAR History and Geography. So today, we're going to start off with our very first lesson. Again, we're beginning all the fun and excitement all over again from the very, very beginning. So, our very first lesson, lesson one, we're starting off with history. Okay, we're looking at history, we're looking at Canadian history, starting in the 20th century. So, here on my slide, you have Canada in the early 1900s. But before we begin, I do have an announcement. So I need everyone to listen very, very closely and pay attention right now. Okay, I do have an announcement. Next week, next week, usually we have class together. We're here together on Tuesdays and Thursday. However, there is a change. There's a change. So next week, okay, I'm gonna write this on my screen. My class, PLAR History, Geography. Okay, we're usually here together on Tuesdays and Thursday, but next week, only for next week, we'll have class on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, there will be no class on Tuesday as I'm switching time slot with Andrea, who is the PLAR English teacher. Okay, so PLAR History Geography next week, Wednesdays and Thursday, same time as always, 10 a.m. Central Time. If you're on this Eastern time slot, that's 11 a.m. Okay, so next week, PLAR History and Geography will be taking place on Wednesday instead of Tuesday, and we'll still be together here on Thursday. Okay, I'm just switching time slot with Andrea. I'm helping Andrea out as Andrea and the rest of the PLAR staff are off to Winnipeg for a conference. So pretty much all the PLAR staff will be gone except for myself, because someone needs to be here and running the show and having the fun and excitement going. So they're leaving on like Tuesday or Wednesday, I don't know exactly, but I'm switching time slot with Andrea. There's no class on Monday, family day, long weekend. So again, PLAR History Geography, Wednesday and Thursday of next week, same time slot. Okay, I'll post this on my Facebook status. Hopefully, Andrea will remind her students as well. Okay, and I will repeat this at the end of today's class as well. Hopefully, there's no confusion. Okay, that is my announcement for today. So let's get back on track, and we'll be looking at today's first lesson, Canada in the early 1900s, lesson number 1. Okay, this is at the very, very beginning of your textbook if you are following along in your textbook. Okay. All right. Let's get to today's class learning goals. Okay, so I'm gonna write this on the screen. Today's class learning goal is the man that is on the Canadian $5 bill, and his name is Wilfrid Laurier, so we'll be looking at Laurier. Okay, we will be also looking at a battle that took place before World War One, and that war was called the Boer War. Next, we'll be looking at Welcome to Canada, immigration. We'll be looking at immigration. We'll be looking at women and women's life experience. And finally, we'll be looking at foreign policy, otherwise known as free trade. these are our learning goals for today. Again, our learning goal is the man that's on the Canadian $5 bill, Wilfrid Laurier, the battles that took place before World War One, and Canada was involved in it, the Boer War. We'll be looking at Welcome to Canada, immigration. We'll be looking at women's lived experience in terms of jobs and their duties. And finally, we'll be looking at foreign policy with Canada and United States in terms of free trade. These are your learning goals for today. But at the end of today's lesson, you'll have an understanding of what these terms, these topics are all about. We may not finish today's class lesson, which is okay. We'll just finish that off next week. Okay, and finally, I'll be going over questions on assignment 1. Okay. Any questions before we begin today's class, lecture, or notes? All right, that's excellent. Let's start. So again, the man that's on the Canadian $5 bill. So you reach into your pocket or your wallet or your purse, and you pull out a Canadian $5 bill and you flip it on, or look at it in front of you. You'll see this man right here. You'll see this man right here. His name is Wilfrid Laurier, and he was Canada's Prime Minister during this time period of the early 20th century. Okay, so Laurier was Canada's Prime Minister from 1896 to 1911. He was our Prime Minister. So during this time period, Canada had experienced rapid growth, industrialization, and immigration. Okay, Laurier's goal when he was in power or when he was in office was that he wanted Canada to develop its western provinces. Okay, I'll get more to that in a second. Okay, that was his goal. That was his vision. He wanted to develop Canada, especially with the western provinces. He also wanted to build up our railroad system. He wanted to expand that, so build up railroads. And he also wanted Canada to have its own control of its defenses in terms of military. Okay, Laurier saw the 20th century as Canada's century, a land of promise, a land of opportunity, a time of change, a period of opportunity. Okay, Laurier wanted Canada to be a self-governing country away from Britain. Okay, even though Canada during this time period is now its own country, has joined Confederation. However, Canada was still highly linked to the British Empire and Britain. So Canada has strong links and ties and influences based from Britain. However, Laurier, like I said, wanted to move away from that. He wanted to move away from that. What Laurier also did when he was in power was that he eliminated a law on public funding for Catholic school boards in Manitoba. So now Catholic and Protestant religion can now have education rights in Manitoba. Like I said here where it says Canada's development of Western provinces, as you recall from last class on Tuesday, when Canada joined Confederation, we only had 4 provinces. With Laurier, he added 2 more. Okay, so in 1905, he added Saskatchewan, and also the province of Alberta. These were the 2 provinces that he also created. These are the 2 provinces that joined Canada in terms of Confederation. So now we have 6 provinces during this time period of 1905. Okay, these were just some of the achievements and goals that Wilfrid Laurier had. However, his overall legacy while he was Canada's Prime Minister was that under his leadership, Canada continued its industrialization, where we started to grow as a country together. It was growing in terms of city as well, so urbanization. Again, like I said, he also created two provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, okay, which straightened Canada to make Canada stronger in terms of a national unity. And there was more attention in terms of English and French, which we will get to very, very shortly. Okay, so this is a little snapshot of Wilfrid Laurier, Canada's Prime Minister during this time period. So what I really want to emphasize is that his goals again, which was Canada's development of Western provinces, building out railroads, and building Canada's own defenses in terms of military. Okay, are there questions about Wilfrid Laurier before we continue on? Again, there will be a question on assignment 1 based on Wilfrid Laurier, based on his goals and what he wanted to achieve. Okay? Some little fun facts that I want to throw out there based on Canada's railroad or Canada expansion. Again, this is just some facts that I have gathered throughout my studies, throughout the years, and now I'd like to share it with everyone as well. Okay, so fun facts about Canada's railroad system. So during this time period, okay, we're still always in the early 20th century, the early 1900s. Just keep that in mind in terms of content. Okay, the government, our Canadian government, were eager to build a railroad to open the West for settlements. Okay, Canada, as we know, is a big country, and we wanted to expand and open up the West in terms of Western provinces. How do we do that? Boom, a railroad system. Okay, railway transcontinental, and open up more opportunity in terms of trade. We can trade materials from the East Coast now to the West Coast. We can transport goods, resources, agriculture, materials across Canada now. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, Central Canada. Okay, with our railroad system, we can go across Canada now. Western settlements, in terms of women did not qualify to own any land. Again, we'll talk more about women's lived experience during this time period near the end of the lesson. So by 1914, Canada has more kilometers in terms of railroad lines than any other countries in the world. Thousands of jobs in railway construction provided resources across Canada. Again, just some little fun fact right there. Okay, so you think about it, Canada's railroad system is pretty significant in terms of how we were constructed as a country. Again, this little map of how the railroad line system we have here in Canada. As you see, all these lines, it connects eastern to western Canada. Okay, so you got western Canada, then we got the east coast. Okay, so now we can trade goods back and forth to all the major cities, back and forth. Again, I'm just going to integrate some indigenous content during this time period. Again, you won't see this in your textbook, but it's just something that I would like to share with the class as well. Okay, so that we have a bit of Canadian Indigenous First Nation Aboriginal content when we're looking at history. So I think when looking at history, while exploring topics in terms of Canadian history, I think we really need to take into account Indigenous content as it was significant in terms of how we shape and how we see modern day Canada. So Indigenous in the early 1900s. So we're talking about First Nations, Aboriginal population. They were slowly assimilated into Canadian society. Reserves, as we talked about last class, allows Aboriginal to learn the Canadian way at their own pace. These were the goals of a reserve. Residential school, the purpose of a residential school was to educate the child on living in a modern, year-old Canadian way. Okay, almost like in terms of killing the Indian in the child so that they are able to adapt and learn the more modern Euro-Canadian centric way. These were the goals of his residential school. Also during this time period, there were fewer jobs. Okay, there were not many jobs that were open for indigenous people during this time period. Most of the jobs that were open, they were given to immigrants, people coming from different countries to Canada. New immigrants instead of land that had once belonged to First Nations. So all these immigrants from different countries were now coming to Canada, and now they're living on that land that was once belonged to Indigenous people. And also during this time period in the early 1900s, there were a decline in traditional First Nation occupations. Okay, so we're seeing lots of different movements and activities started to incorporate Canadian, European, Eurocentric culture influences in terms of enforcing it, assimilating Aboriginal people during this time period. Later on, throughout this term, throughout this course, you'll see more about the progressions of how Indigenous history changed throughout the time. Okay? Again, just some little fun fact that I want to throw out there and integrate in terms of my lesson. So let's get a bit back on track, and we are going to talk about our next learning goal. We're going to talk about the Boer War, okay, otherwise known as the South African War, okay. The Boer War took place between 1899 to 1902. As you know, this was a war, a battle that took place before World War One. Okay, so pretty significant. The Boer War, otherwise known as the South African War. So just a bit of timeline and how this shaped and influenced Canada during this time period. So between 1883 and 1886, Britain had interest in Africa and turn its inland. Britain discovered that there was gold, there was diamond, there were lots of resources in this particular area. So Britain had interest in terms of this land, this particular area. In 1895, Britain attempted to invade this particular area, but they failed. In 1899, the Transvaal Republic Orange Free State declared war on Britain, otherwise known as Africa, declared war on Britain. So this is why the war took place. This was the reason it took place. Again, just a little map, hopefully to help illustrate what was going on. So I have a map of South Africa on my screen. Anything that's pretty much orange during this time period belonged to the British Empire. They were colonized. They had influences. They were colonized by the Britain. So they had Britain influences pretty much wherever that's in orange. However, what's in yellow belongs to Africa still. Okay, belongs to Africa still. So pretty much all the British colonies around this yellow area, they discover gold, diamond, other resources in this particular area. Therefore, Britain wanted to invade this area in order to colonize them and take their resources. However, that did not happen, and a war was declared on Britain. Okay, again, map of South Africa. Continuing with looking at the Boer War. Our Prime Minister, again, Wilfrid Laurier, compromised. Canada equipped, transported 1,000 volunteers to send them to South Africa In South Africa, there was volunteer British soldiers. And on October 30th, 1899, Canadian volunteer soldiers sailed from Quebec City for Cape Town, South Africa. So pretty much, we here in Canada, we sailed out to South Africa to join this war. However, Quebec and French Canadians sympathized with the Boers and were against Canadian participating. Okay, so pretty much the French Canadians said no. They pretty much said no and did not want to fight in the war or support Canada in the war. So why was the Boer War significant? Why was it important in terms of Canadian history? Why was the Boer War significant in terms of Canadian history? Well, Canada, again, like I mentioned before, was highly influenced by the British Empire. Pretty much whatever Britain did, Canada did as well. As we were a colony of Britain, so if Britain went to war, if they were at war, Canada pretty much joined too. So the Boer War was Canada's first overseas foreign war. Okay, it wasn't World War One, but the Boer War was Canada's first overseas foreign war. This war also increased Canada's identity as an English nation. Again, more unity, more nationalism established. It gave Canada confidence to participate in future international events. It demonstrated Canada can be its own nation, and it increased Canada's English and French relation tension. Okay, so during this time period, it was mainly dominated by English-speaking and French-speaking Canadians. Okay, however, again, tension, conflict between the English and the French, which we will see later in during World War One as we continue with our class. Okay, so this is pretty much why the Boer War was significant in terms of Canadian history. First overseas foreign battle increased our sense of identity as an English nation. It gave us confidence to participate in international events because Canada was pretty much a brand new country at this time. And again, more significantly, it increased Canadian, English, and French relationship with tension. Okay, English and French Canadians did not agree with one another. Okay, British imperialism in Canada. Again, what that means in the word imperialism is pretty much a country influencing or imposing their culture and influences onto another. Okay, this is what pretty much Britain did in terms of Canada. Britain had strong power, culture, and they wanted to impose that lifestyle here in Canada. So it was supported by all social class, most vocally by the small, powerful group of English-speaking social and political elites. Unity between Canada and other British colonies in terms of economic, military, intelligence, spiritual, and culture. Again, pretty much what Britain did, Canada did as well. We had all their, again, economics, military influences, culture influences as well. Okay, again, this is supported by all social class. Okay, so pretty much everyone, whether you're rich or poor, had influence from Britain here in Canada. Are there any questions right now, class, before we continue with today's class? Again, we'll see how far we get in terms of today's lesson. If we don't finish, that's okay. We'll finish it off next week. If we do, that's great. But if not, that's okay. But are there any questions on any materials we talked about so far in terms of Laurier, the Boer War? Okay. And you'll see some of these topics again in terms of assignment 1. Some of these topics you won't have answer or questions on, but most of them you will. Most of them you will. Okay, so we are going to talk about immigration, where Canada was a welcoming country during this time period where we wanted people, and people came as well. So, the word immigration pretty much means other people from other countries, continent, coming to Canada. They're coming here to live in Canada to have a better quality of life, opportunity, jobs. Okay, so again, during this time period of the early 1900s or the 20th century, immigration was big. It was big. Our population was growing. So between 1901 and 1921, we had about 3 million newcomers. That's a lot of people in a short time period. In about 20 years, 3 million people came to Canada. Why? I'll get to that very shortly. So, for example, the population of Canada in 1921 was close to 9 million, over 8 million, give or take. Okay? Put that into perspective and content in terms of today, 2016, the population of Canada is approximately, well, 35 million plus. Probably closer to 36, give or take, but 35, 36 million approximately. Okay, so you can see Canada increased its population as time went on. However, from this little illustration right here, you can see the growth that took place. Okay, between the early 1900s and 1912, we had about 400,000 newcomers. So a lot of growth took place during this time period. Okay, so a lot of people start to come. Canada had a lot of people coming here in terms of our population, in terms of immigration. Okay, we'll talk about why people start coming here to Canada in just a bit, but let's look at some definitions that I'm going to throw out there, and hopefully by looking at these definitions, it will help have a better understanding in terms of the next couple slides coming up. So race and racism in its definition. Again, we may have heard of, an individual or group of people race, but we don't really know what that word means. Or racism. Okay, we hear racism all the time on the news, social media. Okay, but we may not necessarily know what these terms mean. I'm gonna define these terms in a way, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding. So race. Okay, when we talk about race, we talk about identifying a distinct population on the basis of appearance, culture, ethnicity, and social economic status. Okay, this is what the word race means. Okay, a group of people identifying a distinct population based on their appearance, culture, ethnicity, and social economic status. Okay, this is what race. What racism means is that we're treating a population different based on socially constructed values. Okay, so we're treating a particular group of people differently. Okay, based on something that was socially constructed based on their values. Okay, so again, it could be culture, could be appearance, could be social economic status. Okay, these are all factors of racism. Okay, treating a population different based on socially constructed values. Okay, so let's keep those two definitions in mind, and we'll look at the next slide. Okay, so let's look at immigration in terms of racism during this time period. Okay, we're going to talk about Chinese Canadians during this time period in terms of racism. So most Chinese Canadians that came here to Canada, um, those were despised of taking all the jobs. Okay, they had this stereotype, here comes to Canada and taking all the jobs from everyone else. The Canadian government, the Canadian federal government, lobbied to deport Chinese immigrants. They wanted to send Chinese immigrants back to China or back to wherever they came from. This was the goal of the federal government during this time period. We don't want them here. We want to send them back to where they came from. What they did was that in 1885, they developed something called the Chinese head tax. The Chinese head tax. What the Chinese head tax was basically like a fee that you had to pay if you wanted to come to Canada. So in 1885, the Chinese federal head tax was $50, $50. So in 1885, any Chinese immigrants coming to Canada must pay $50. In 1901, the Chinese federal head tax increased to $100, $100. And again, that Chinese head tax increased once again in 1904 to $500. A lot of bucks, a lot of dollars. So you put that into context, $500 in 1904 was a lot of money. Okay, a lot of people didn't have $500 in 1904. Okay, you see where the Canadian government was going? They increased the values in terms of dollars, in terms of the head tax, so that it decreased the interest of Chinese immigrants coming to Canada. Okay, because we didn't want Chinese immigrants coming to Canada. Okay, yeah, this is racism based on a particular race, based on their appearance, their culture, and their social economic status. So Chinese Canadians that did live in Canada, they live in segregated areas. Okay, they lived away from the mainstream populated area. They live with their own people, own culture, otherwise known as Chinatown. Okay, so they live in a small area based on their own people. Continuing looking at immigration and racism. Continuing looking at immigration and racism. In British Columbia, out west, 60% were British origin. Okay, 60% were from Britain. They were white, Protestant, 60% in British Columbia. However, almost half of that, 40%, which is close to almost half, were Asian. Chinese, Japanese, Asian. Okay, primarily descent of immigration. So a lot of Chinese immigrants, or Asian, Japanese, I should say, lived out west in BC. Asian Canadians in general, they were discriminated. Okay, they were not treated the same. We can look at racism, okay, as a factor, but they were not treated the same based on their race. Based on their race, they were denied the right to vote. They could not vote, even though they lived in Canada. They could not vote. They could not enter several professions, some jobs, again based on their race. Okay, again racism. They live in segregated in public areas, like I said, Chinatown, for example, because they cannot live in the mainstream city, for example. Again, racism. They are threatened with physical violence, again, for a particular reason, could be culture, appearance, again, racism. Again, they were discriminated on housing policies. Okay, they could not buy a house the same way a white British man or woman would. Okay, these were some of the factors, these were some of the barriers, challenges that Asians Canadians face when they first came to Canada during this time period. A lot of racism, not treated the same, it was unfair. It was just unfair. Okay? Any questions? Questions? So let's talk about why was this time period of the early 1900s such an intriguing time for immigrants coming to Canada. Why did people want to come to Canada? Why? Why? What was the reason? What were the factors? Well, one factor that was mentioned in your textbook was that pretty much the Canadian government put a lot of effort. They put a lot of effort. They used advertisement. They spent time. They spent money recruiting people to Canada. Again, Canada is this big land. We just opened up the western provinces. Laurier created two new provinces. We had a railroad system. So we wanted people to live in Canada, particularly out west. We wanted people to come here and live in Canada. So again, the Canadian government used a lot of advertisement where to try to gain the interest of people. They spent a lot of time trying to recruit people, and they spent a lot of money trying to recruit people to come here and live in Canada. Another factor was the 1898 Yukon Gold Rush. During this time period of 1898, just before the new century, in Yukon, we had experienced a gold rush. People heard on the news, on the radio, newspaper, that in Yukon there was gold. And we know gold has values, it has wealth to it. Everyone wanted to become rich. Who doesn't want gold, basically, right? So in 1898, there was the Yukon Gold Rush period. Everyone flooded, everyone from around the world came to Yukon in search for gold. We wanted gold so we become rich. However, not many people found gold. Some did, some didn't, but a lot didn't found gold. Again, because of this, some of these people stayed in Canada because of the Yukon Gold Rush. So that was one factor why a lot of people started to come to Canada during this time period. Again, we already know that we had rapid growth in Western Canada, so I'm not going to say that again. But other factors that I included here, that's not in the textbook on my slide, something that I call push and pull factors. Okay, push and pull factor pretty much explains what it is. So push, where push factors pretty much means something that is happening in their own countries that want to make people leave. Okay, so you're pushing away. So why do people want to leave their country and come to Canada? Well, in that particular country, it could be ethnic and religious problems or tensions. Could be urban crisis. Could be not enough jobs or industrial uphaul. Could be collapse of the peasants. Not good farming, for example. Okay, so these are maybe some of the reasons why people want to leave their country and come to Canada. Okay, pull factors. Pull factors are factors that why do people want to come to Canada, but something that here we have Canada, we have. What does Canada have that in their particular country don't have? So, for example, we have a strong Canadian economy. Okay, that may gain interest of people. Here in Canada, we have high wages. Okay, we pay people pretty well. We have technology during this time period. It was the period of industrial revolution. Agriculture, machinery, okay? Especially in the periods, we have a lot of land for farming, okay? Improved transportation. As we know, we have the Canadian railroads. Goods for people can be transported. And pretty much Canada was a land of opportunity. Canada was the land of opportunity. So why not come to Canada? It's a land of opportunity during this time period. A lot of things are going well. Their economy, technology, agriculture. Okay, so why not come to Canada? So these were some of the reasons why people came to Canada, why people left the country for Canada, the Yukon Gold Rush, for another example. Again, period of change, period of rapid growth, period of industrialization, a period of opportunity. This was pretty much the goal of the early 1900s that Prime Minister Laurier established. Okay? Any questions about immigration before we move on to our next topic? We're going to move on to our last learning goal for today. Hopefully we can finish that off, and hopefully we'll have some time to go over questions on assignment 1. Again, I don't want to rush anything, class, because we have so much time together the next 9 weeks. So we're going to take our time. We're going to go through these lessons. Again, some of these materials are in your textbook. I have also included additional information on my slides. So that's why it's really, really important that if you have the time, come to class and see what is posted on my smartboard screen, and additionally from your textbook as well. Okay? Alright, let's move on to our last learning goal for today. Oh, we're going to finish off with one more thing. Before we get to that, why racism? Okay? So we talked a lot about racism, Chinese, Japanese, Asian people, race come to Canada that face a lot of racism. Even Aboriginal people face racism from the white British, Canadians, English or French speaking as well. So, in the early 20th century, Canadian fear immigration. Okay, we had that fear when people from other countries come in here. Okay, we didn't know what to expect. We had fear of immigration when they come in here, so this is what the tone was. English Canadian feared that foreigners would threaten the dominant of British culture. Okay, that was the mindset of the English Canadians. They had the fear of people from the outside world, foreigners would threaten the dominance of a British culture. Again, British culture or the British Empire was heavily influenced in Canada. So they had that fear. French Canadians, on the other hand, French Canadians had fear that they would be absorbed in a English society. Okay, French Canadians had a small population in Canada, so they had fear that they will be absorbed in the Canadian society. French Canadians wanted to maintain their own identity in a sense. Like I mentioned before, Canada had English speaking and French speaking culture. Okay, there was two culture in one. English was the dominant, French were the minority, but they had fear that they would absorb into the mainstream English society. So this is kind of the factors why lots of racism took place in terms of this time period. Okay, we may not necessarily see these factors today. All right, I think my mic just turned off, so I just got my mic back on. So I think we're good. All right, let's finish off one more the lesson. We'll maybe do one more slide before we call it a day. So now I'm going to talk about women's study, Canadian women's studies. Okay, so when we talk about women or women's studies or Canadian women, there are lots of factors that we need to take into account. Okay, we need to take into account. Okay, when exploring all these factors, we need to look at women's lived experience. We must look at it in terms of that particular time period in that framework. Okay, we need to take that account in terms of the past, future, and present as well. We must acknowledge in terms of when looking at women, acknowledge that socially constructed influences on how society develops women history. Okay, So we cannot blame women history cannot blame men for these factors that we're going to talk about. Okay, we cannot blame anyone. We cannot blame the white British society. We cannot blame men for these factors, but we must look at it in a broader sense in terms of the time period and that place. Okay, so women in the work and the lived experience. So pretty much, women during this time period, we had gender roles. Okay, men, women, masculine, feminine, okay, marriage, motherhood, domestic work, intertwined in all social class. Okay, when I'm talking about social class, we're talking about a social hierarchy based on a structure based on economic status and social status. Okay, so social class. So it's based on economic status and based on social behaviors. Okay, so it doesn't matter you're rich, poor, happy, unhappy, um, etc. All women during this time period had the same factors: marriage, motherhood, working in domestic fields. They worked before marriage, financially uh, separated women. They work in textile factories, waitresses, domestic service, offices, nurse, female teachers. Okay, a lot of these are gender stereotype. Gender stereotype. Okay, or simplified, generalized descriptions of masculinity and femininity. Okay, so again, a lot of these job roles of offices, nurse, female teachers, cooking, cleaning, being a mother, taking care of the kids, are all gender stereotype. Okay, these are kind of what kind of jobs women had during this time period. We're gonna do one more slide before we call it a day. So women in a work and a living experience continue. Again, they had daily expectation, house cleaning, washing, ironing, baking, cooking, cleaning, dusting, maiding. These were the daily roles. Domestic service, okay. Working class, immigrants, lowest pay. Okay, all these were influenced by the Victorian ethos, the Victorian period, an ideology formulated driven by the white Protestant middle class folks of the British origin, code of behavior based on gender and gender sphere. Okay, so again, a lot of stereotype based on gender, based on women. Again, this is a part of women's history, women's studies. So again, a lot of these factors we need to take into account: the time period, the place. Okay, all these factors must take into account. Again, we cannot just blame men or blame history for why women lived the way they did. It just happened, so we must need to take that into account. Okay, so I'm gonna stop it for today, class. That's almost near. We'll finish up, do a bit of review next class on lesson 1. I will go over assignment 1 questions. Okay, but I just want to remind everyone that next week, PLAR history and geography will be on Wednesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Time. Okay, no class Tuesday. Okay, I'm switching time slot with PLAR English teacher Andrea. Okay, and I'll be taking her Wednesday time slot next week. This is the one-time thing only, so I just want to remind everyone that. Okay? Are there any questions before we go? Again, no classes at all here at Wausau on Monday. Family Day long weekend, so everyone's gonna be sleeping in. Okay.